I want to play dress up. And I'm like, oh, well, then you're going to play dress up. You don't have to buy clothing. You're a grown woman. You're going to go to all these stores. You're going to try on stuff. You're going to take pictures. You're going to just play. You're going to have fun. But it's some form of play.
Yes,
After
yes.
they get the love, it's some form of play.
Hey, empowered survivors. Welcome to the Let's Heal Show. I'm your host, Beth Jones, aka the Healing Mentor. My mission is to inspire and mentor other survivors of trauma and abuse as they walk their healing pathways. I'm here to help you become fiercely devoted to your healing, turning your pain into your power. That's why this show is all about healing. And through our guests, we will explore healing in action. Sometimes I'll share my journey. Other times, we'll hear from fellow survivors about their transformational healing experiences, bringing purpose to their pain and shining light in the darkness of this world. We'll also have conversations with gifted healers and learn about various resources and tools from those who support us on our journeys. So, come on, everybody, let's heal. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Let's Heal Show. I'm so excited to have a wonderful guest today. Rebecca Anderson is with us. Welcome to the show. Delighted to have you.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yes. Yes. Would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
All right. So, as you said, my name is Rebecca Anderson, and I am a Reiki practitioner, a trauma-informed somatic educator and practitioner, a kidding around yoga instructor. Just dabble and love lots of things. But for me, I feel kind of like life has been my greatest teacher, which I know we're going to get into. And so I feel that a lot of what I've come to for myself and for my clients is a lot about embodied leadership and embodied wisdom and integrating, these lessons that we learn from life and from trauma. And then just personally, I'm a single mom. I have 3 kiddos that are all teenagers now. And I am super passionate about masculine, feminine dynamics, conscious parenting, human design, gene keys. And then for fun, I love to dance and play sports, be in my body. That's what makes me
Movement.
happy.
Yeah. And I've seen you use that word that I like so much, empowered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
great word. We'll come around and talk about that a little bit more. So, and the guests on this show, when I was putting this show together, was thinking about myself, my stories, obviously, which I tell, and then I was thinking about other survivors, those of us who have survived trauma and abuse, and we have our healing journeys that we've been on, sharing those stories, and then bringing on the healers, the people that help us to heal. And you are one of those amazing people that's both.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so that'll be fun to talk all about that. And you and I met very recently through a mastermind that we're doing together, which is sort of based on that human design and gene keys, which I also find fascinating.
Yeah, I love it. It's been so fun to just dive into that and then to meet other amazing women and people like you. I'm loving it.
Yeah, me too. It's a lot of fun. I studied astrology. Well, I don't study myself, but I have an astrologer that I've been working with for quite a long time now and have a very cool relationship with her because she understands me and can read to me in a way that it's much different than, getting a one-time reading. It's definitely not like reading it in the newspaper, right? So it's much more
Sure.
personal. But the human design and gene keys are similar to that, right? Telling us what it is that's in us and what we're born to do and to be in our zone of genius, as it's been referred to me recently, which
Yeah.
is really amazing to understand about yourself. So if you're listening to this and you have never done that before, highly recommend it. I think we would both highly recommend it.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, understand much more about who you are. So this show is all about healing, and we will talk about healing, a little bit about your healing journey, and then we're going to talk about what it is you do today to help people to heal, because that's very interesting to me based on my own experience with the somatic movement therapy. But in order to talk about why it is that we need to heal, there's a moment of pause on those life experiences that led us to our healing journey. So just touch on that just for a little bit, whatever feels comfortable to you.
Okay. So I'll kind of give you the moment. And then for me, what I have found helpful is I don't as much go to the specifics, but because of stuff that I know can relate to everyone, I'll kind of generally find, oh, these are my
Great.
wounds that showed up, and this is what I was dealing with. So for me, that moment was divorce for me, right? And it actually happened before divorce because I was separated for a year before my divorce. And that year of separation, I can honestly say, was a living hell. That year of separation was the hardest, worst, scariest moment of my life. And that is the year that I literally, you talk about the trauma and my understanding now, like my body was in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all of the trauma for a year. Like my body was so dysregulated and I just was in fear. I was in fear just because of what was going on. I thought maybe I was going to lose my kids and just things like that, right? But what I realized as I've been doing this healing work and understanding, right, that along the way, so my marriage was toxic, right? And it wasn't healthy for me. And eventually, when I left, I was on this path to be like, okay, no matter what happened, I don't want to repeat patterns and I want to look at myself. Like, right, there's always two in everything.
Yeah, but you look at yourself.
Yes.
Yes.
And so is what I discovered on this healing journey and this healing path is just that I'd abandoned myself. And when we look
Oh,
at inner child healing and trauma, there's no shame in it, but we abandon ourselves normally for love, belonging, acceptance, safety, right? All these basic human needs, things that we need. And I'm sure we'll get into it more later, but what I realized is I got deep to my wounds that I realized one of my biggest wounds was the fear of abandonment and rejection. For me, it was by the masculine, and that if I was too much, even for me, I got down so deep if they saw me naked. Like I got super to this root deep cause. But then when we don't understand is what we develop is these, maladaptive coping strategies or trauma responses, right? It's because we're trying to get this love, belonging, acceptance, all that. So it's what that looked like for me. Like it was so many things. My freshman year in college, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, panic disorder, chronic fatigue syndrome, right? Like, which is basically we don't know what's wrong with you. And now we know what's wrong, right? It was like all this, but then also like looking back, my other strategies were toxic perfectionism, codependency. At one point, I had a food disorder, body dysmorphia. So, I mean, you can like the gamut, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so,
yeah.
in the state, obviously the big message now is like, oh my gosh, looking back now, I can have so much compassion for this version of myself and this Rebecca, but I was doing whatever I could to get those things, love, belonging, acceptance, safety. But is what I was doing was abandoning myself. Because at some point, right, we learn that there's certain parts of ourself that are too much, and so that's where the inner child shadow work, like I had exiled parts of myself, and we put on masks and armor and all these things. And so I realized and so my life was ruled by guilt, shame, and fear.
Yeah.
And I believed, as I've done the work and I go back, that for me, my belief was, along with those wounds that we talked about, is that my worth was based off of beauty, goodness, and performance. I thought my worth was based off of those things. So I did whatever I had to do in those categories to get the love that I was longing for and acceptance and belonging.
So I feel like you're reading from my book. Like you're literally reading quotes from my book is what I feel like. So, and we know, and we talked before, so we know there's a lot of similarities in the past we've been down. So I want to start there at the end, and we're going to kind of work backward on what you've been talking about there. But at the end, so today, what do you know that your worth and your value is based on?
My gosh, that it's non-negotiable, right? That it's our birthright, that every human being on this planet is worthy of love, belonging, acceptance, and safety from the moment they took their first breath, from the moment they were born. It's nothing that we have to earn. And
That's
that's
right.
where that like internalized capitalism, internalized patriarchy comes in, this hustle grind that we have to do something to get those things. And so it has to do with deprogramming, deconditioning. And one of the things that I like to talk about too with the people I work with is coming home to yourself, right? Like
Yeah.
coming home to like who we are and releasing those, rewiring our brain, choosing new thoughts, choosing, new perspectives, new paradigms. So there's a lot of unraveling and then creation as well, like all of it.
Yeah. I want to go, I'm tired. Because what you just
Yeah.
talked about, it's a lot, right? It's a long
No,
journey. It's a
and
hard
also
journey, but
yes,
it's good.
and,
It's
and,
worth
and
it.
this is the thing that I think is beautiful, which we can talk more about, but I've actually dealt with this last week.
Hmm.
And because I have an injury, a knee injury, and I talked to you about the somatics and the movement. And so to me, it's, God, universe, like okay, you get to rest. Like you have no choice, you get to
Yeah.
rest. And you talk about it like just being this process. Well, one of the things that came up as I rested and as I listened to my body, and this message has come up to me so much in the past few years, is what you said is I am tired, right?
Yes.
I think that anybody that's been through this is tired, but also for me, this is part of my work, my path. The collective feminine is tired. Like
Yes.
the feminine is
We
tired.
are. I agree.
We were not wired for the hustle, grind, perform, do. We are to be, right? Our essence is being. And so there's this tiredness, but then also one of the things that I do, and we'll talk more about it in this inner child work, is healing isn't linear. And for me, there's been all these phases of this inner child and all these emotions that I've allowed. And one of the big ones is grief. And so
Yeah.
there's, like you said, along with this tiredness,
Yeah.
like, and it's not like a one-time thing. I've been doing the work, quote to speak, whatever the work means, right? Like that's the language people use. But I've been on this journey for a while and I'm very self-aware. But
Yeah.
we talk about, the body keeps the score. Like it's layers. Like there's
Yes.
things that I've grieved and cried and screamed and raged about, and then a week later, a month later, a year later, whatever, it's like it's back, right? And so for me, it's also just allowing, as this relationship with our body that we're going to talk about, like our body is wise. Our body knows the medicine. Our body is the teacher. Our emotions are indicators, right? So as I've allowed myself to be in that space with, again, non-judgment, because before there was so much judgment, even that part, I had to earn rest. I had to earn, like, right, with that
Mm.
I was living in, like, and so, yeah, it's this whole thing that, it's hard and it's not. It's hard because it's exhausting and tiring, but the things that we can do to heal from it and to grow and to move really are simple. We make it, the world and a lot of what's out there tries to really, really complicate it.
I agree with you. And it is actually, it's quite simple, the things that we can take on to do. So, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to step onto that pathway. It's really hard for people to start a healing journey and then to walk it because the healing itself is also very difficult.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it is. It is hard. You talked about divorce. That's my example. When I talk about trauma, I put it in two categories. I put it in a macro category and a micro category. So I tell people trauma can't be ranked like yours is worse than mine. It's really about how each one of us internalize it. That's the measure of how severe a trauma or an abuse is to each of us individually. I think about divorce because I've also been through a divorce. And, of course, the divorce itself, everybody thinks, oh, that's a major, if you go through that, that's major. And sort of the macro trauma is how I refer to that. But more challenging for me were what I call the micro traumas. And those were the daily interactions that just chipped away at me. And I mean, I did the same thing that you did. I mean, at the end, by the time it came, time for me to heal, and then my marriage was a casualty of my healing process because we just were not in the same place anymore. And I was just moving on in a very different direction. I had experienced so many of those micro traumas at that point in time. My way of surviving was really just to isolate myself. And I had exiled literally every person in my life who could have nourished me and could have helped me. The very people who loved me and wanted to help me, I was just like, no, just stay out, stay out, stay out. And that was all a product of just trying to survive in those daily, what I call those micro interactions that were painful. And my way of surviving was just to really to go in to myself, but also to lose myself. I mean, I've been telling people recently who've been getting to know in my life that I gave up everything about me. I gave up except the tiniest little bit that God let me hold on to. That's the part that saved me. It was the
Mm.
part that said, you're going to be okay. You're going to heal from this. We're going to get through this. And that's really all I had left at the end when it came time for me to heal. So I completely, I have a lot of compassion and empathy for you for going through that because not your exact same experiences, but I understand that it's a hard one to go through. And I don't think we give enough credit to the daily, everybody thinks about the big stuff and what were the big things that got you to getting divorced. That man, when you're with somebody who ultimately that's what happens, those daily interactions are just, they're the ones, the subtle ones, right? They chip at us and we don't really know, you don't really notice that's what's happening until one day the micros become a big macro.
Well, and this is where I think we can get back to, like, you talk about compassion for everyone's experience, right? Because there's the quote out there that, assuming that everyone's doing the best they can in their circumstances.
Yeah.
And I believe that, but I've added to it. I think that everyone's doing the best they can in their circumstances, with the resources that they have, with the knowledge they have, and with the support they have.
Yes, 100%
Right.
agree.
And so it's this piece, like you said, about having compassion. Like you know, that other quote that I love is, be kind, everyone's fighting a battle you know nothing about. And for me, like you said, that's what it was. Mine was a little different. And this is what I love about the human experiences, right? We just get to share, and everyone's so different. We can relate, and our shared humanity comes into play, but it's so different. Like you said, you isolated. I was the opposite. I didn't say no to anything. I was, at that point, I was in a religion that I'd been in my entire life. And so I poured myself into that. I put that mask on, that armor on. And that was one of the reasons also that I stayed for so long, because of that piece in religion and what marriage meant in this religion and what divorce meant. And so, yeah, I would just, I'd be out there taking care of people and loving on people. And it's just, it impacts everybody different. And it's just, we do, like you said, we do what we can to survive, like to talk about, like, right. And when we're talking about the body, I mean, when we're talking about being in survival mode and we have high cortisol in our body, I mean, that trauma takes a toll in so many different ways. And that's what I've been unpacking recently, is the residue of the impact of trauma on my physical body. I've done so much healing with like my soul and my emotion. And now it's like my body is like, okay, we're safe to like do this. Like, all right, we're going to fall apart. You're going to feel like an old lady. But it's like, now I'm like, oh, now, because again, like you said, when you're in survival mode, like you're numb, like you have to be numb.
Emotionless. Yeah, emotionless. And that you talk about the masks too. So I say the same things. For me, my mask was the professional career that I carried with me for so long, and just pouring myself into something that I excelled at and I was really good at it. That's probably also part of my survivorship, but it didn't really fulfill me like what I do now. Wasn't my passion or something that lit me on fire like the work that I do now does, but I had to wear that mask for part of the journey, right? To be the person who I am, to experience what I've experienced. But that was, I mean, I wore it well. So similar to your experience with the religious people that you were engaged. I started to say family. I don't know. I don't think I should say that with you. So you might not consider it that way. So, but that part of your life, all the people who knew me professionally, and I would just assume a lot of those people who knew you in that capacity, they're shocked when you come back one day and you're like, oh no, I'm somebody very different. Look at me now. I'm not that, right? And they're surprised because we wear the mask so well, right? You just hide what's really happening. Hmm?
For sure.
You do. So tell me how you got on your healing pathway. What led you there?
Oh my gosh, it's so complicated and so complex. But the first thing was actually about a year before I separated from my former husband. So I told you, all kind of like the diagnoses, the health problems, like all of this. And I remember watching a documentary about plant-based nutrition at the time. And I was just like, huh. Like, I was just one of those believers that I was like, when it piqued my interest, because there was tons of research back then about how, it could prevent reverse heart disease and diabetes and like all these things. But I was like, I wonder about my depression and anxiety and like things like that. So I went on a journey, and one of the doctors that was actually in this documentary I watched was in Ohio, in Columbus, where I lived. So I went to their place, I started studying with them, and I actually got off all my meds on my own that I'd been on 18 years, and I've never been on them since. So it's interesting how everyone does it differently. So for me, because you're in that place when you're in trauma and you're in all this and there's not much you can do, I was like, oh, I can do the food thing. At that point, that was something I could do. I couldn't do the exercise. I couldn't do like all these other things, but I literally healed my body with a plant-based diet. And that was the first thing. And so for me, looking back, it was like, I was doing it because I wanted to, have energy to play with my children. I had young kids and I wanted to explore my depression and anxiety. But what it really did now is that healing my body first gave me the strength to leave, gave me the strength to choose me, gave me the strength to like, okay, maybe I can do this, right?
Yeah.
And so my first thing was actually getting my body healthy. And I didn't know I was doing it for other reasons. I just, and then after that, it just propelled, like I have a degree in social work. So my background was in social work. So I had like, minimal knowledge because I was a stay-at-home mom. It's not like I had been in the field forever, but after I left, it was just like I told you. So that was the catalyst. And then I was just on this mission to find myself. And so I remember some of the pieces, one of the first books I read was Brené Brown, Gifts of Imperfection. That's a great one. Like that kind of started me. And it was just all these little pieces. And it's interesting enough, I did all these different certifications because here I am, I'm a single mom now. And I was an early childhood educator through my divorce, which pays nothing, even though I loved it. Right. And so that wasn't feasible to do long term. But I started doing all these different things, but I kept like learning and going from thing to thing to thing. But now it's interesting how they all play together with the somatics. Like I did thinking into results with Bob Proctor and Gallagher. So that was my mind. I did, kid yoga training. I did food over medicine instruction with plant-based nutrition. So all these things that looking back now had to do with soma and the body and the whole thing. And so it was like, for me, it was gradual. And then it was, this coming home to myself, and it was piece by piece. But then I think the kind of biggest thing was here, like through COVID and a little after COVID, I was a school counselor at a charter school. And a few years ago, I lost my job because of lack of funding. It was a grant funded position that I was in. And I was looking and looking, right? And I couldn't find anything, but also I was at this point way more aware of my nervous system, and human design had helped because I was like, I knew I was like, I need freedom. I need something that I love, like all these requirements that I had. And I just felt caged and anxious, like everything that I was looking at, right? And also the things I was looking at wasn't enough to help provide for me and my kids anyway, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so literally online, I found the Somatic Institute for Women. And it was one of those, like, those of you that are listening, we talked about the human design. It was a generator. It was like a full body yes, but it made no sense. It was obviously a big amount of money that I had a tax return, and so that's how it worked. But like at the time, I was like, I'd waited to travel. Like this tax return was going to be like my summer to travel. Like even though it was years after my marriage, I'd never done any, like, right?
Yeah.
And this comes up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like who pays this amount of money for something they just found online? Right. But it was this full body yes. As I read the description of this, somatic practitioner and this trauma informed, every piece was like, yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how it would like propelled like my, not final, we're always on a healing journey, but this big, like it was for a year, every other week. And I did I was like, I'm not just doing this for my future clients. Like I'm going to dive deep and I'm going to take every assignment like so personally and do the work on myself. And then after that, I feel like everything started falling into place with that. And during that time is when I got my Reiki master. I'd been level 1 and 2. And so it was just like, again, we talk about things working out for us. There was all these little pieces, and it's like finally kind of in that year and last year, it's like, oh, I see how all these pieces are working together and how they're weaving together and how it worked for me, even though it's been long and hard, like we talk about. But it's like, oh, that's why I didn't get the thing back then, because I needed
Get
to do
it now.
this. That's why I lost my job.
Yeah, exactly. And I've always had similar experiences getting to where I am today. And some people want a divinely led path that I'm not in control of. And it's all the pieces that come together and all the signs. And you suddenly wake up one day and go, oh, I understand why that happened 6 months ago now, or 6 years ago, right? Whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But you suddenly understand that. That's cool. So mine was a little more sudden, although, when you're talking about going through the physical healing of your body and the beginning of it, you don't know where it's going to. I guess I can sort of equate that to me just kind of innocently bebopping into the hypnotherapy room, which when I did that, I was going, and it's interesting to me how I now understand 5 years later, almost 5 years later, what was happening. But I went into that room because I was having trouble like forging relationships with people. I'd taken a promotion at the company that I was working for at the time. And that job required me really to spend a lot more time with people, connecting in a deep way with people. And I was feeling a little bit of, I don't really get anxiety, but for me, I guess you would call it probably a level of anxiety for me, just feeling some reservation about it. I'm talking to my doctor one day and she's like, oh, we have this woman on staff that's a hypnotherapist, and maybe she can help you. It's the kind of therapy you do if you want to quit smoking or lose weight. And I was like, I did so much therapy at that point in time. I was like, sure, yeah, no big deal. And so I completely innocently go in because I think I'm going in to figure out why I feel a little anxiety about my job, my new job, and like the whole world just, literally I died. Like the person who walked in for that reason died in that room and did not walk out. And I walked out, but then it was a couple of years of really intense work to get all those masks off and So I'm the same way. I was like, this is what I'm doing for this reason, but oh no, it's actually for this reason over here. I get it now, right?
Yeah.
And then, this year I'll start writing my next book, and the book is about mastering relationships. So it's interesting to me that that's where I started, was this anxiety that I felt in connecting deeply with people, which I now, of course, understand the root of all of that. And that's that deep self-exploration work that I've done to understand all of that about myself and why I felt that way. And now it's giving way to the work I do now, and I'm going to write a book about it. So there it is, coming full circle.
Yes.
Right. It's cool when those things happen to us. It really is. All right. So let's talk about the somatic movement therapy. So talk a little bit so everyone listening to this in the audience will understand what it is, and maybe a little bit about what's happening as well.
Okay, so somatics comes from the Greek word soma, which just means the body, right? And so when we're talking about somatics, we are literally just building our capacity to be with life. And to kind of just tell you what that means, like a lot of times people are like, oh, I have to be fixed. I'm broken. I have to get rid of this. I have to, like, that's not it. Somatics is literally like moment to moment presence. And again, it's literally that word, it's building capacity. So maybe today my nervous system can handle this. And then tomorrow, like, right, I get better a little each day. And then eventually, like, it's so fast that I can be with life. And so it's through a lot of things like breath, touch, sound, movement. So all those things in that we're talking about in our body. And so for me, the biggest thing with it is that we start with somatic safety. So when we're talking about trauma and all these things, like there's a couple things that are just really important that are basic, but the body heals when it feels safe.
Yeah.
So first of all, and so again, that's where a lot of practitioners that aren't trauma informed, a lot of sometimes people in the coaching industry that are very like yelling, screaming in your face. You've had, everyone's familiar with some of those personal
trauma
experiences, like, re-traumatizing people that have this trauma. And so for me, with what I do personally, and then the work, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's events, whether it's groups, like the first thing I talk about is establishing somatic safety. And this is the thing too, for some people that have had tons of trauma or tons of abuse, I've had not many, but a few that as we go in and talk about this, there's some people that are like, I've never felt safe in my body, or they don't remember, or they don't know what it feels like. And so I just have this simple meditation that I do to take them to this place where they can feel safe. And then we go through, like, what does it feel like in your body? And we go through all the senses. And so literally the body reorganizes, like we said, when it feels safe. And then we also heal in the container of like safe relationships. And so, and for me, like, I always thought that had to be other people, and it does, but like, no, that can start with the relationship with ourselves. Like we actually, especially now, as we're talking about adults, this is the hard thing. When we're talking about children can't always provide safety for themselves. That's the side.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
But when we're adults and we're doing this inner child healing and this somatics work, we are in charge of making ourselves feel safe in our body. And again, if we don't know how, that's okay. It's this practice, it's this learning. But the first order of business is for us to give ourselves that safety. And then, yes, later on, there's so much healing growth that happens in relationship, right? And so there's healing and growth that happens in the container of a safe relationship so that we can be triggered, that person can be our mirror, like all those things. For me, that's been the thing, is this safety in our body. And when we're talking about somatics and movement, it's actually interesting because for me, some of it hasn't been super intentional when I started. And so let me tell you some of the things that have healed me the most before I understood this somatic piece. So you talked about kind of like letting go of everything of yourself and abandoning yourself and keeping this one little piece. Well, it was similar to me. Even though I went out with people, I abandoned a lot of my loves, right? Like I love music. I love
I did too.
I did
the same thing. I did too. I gave it all up.
And so one of the things I did before I found somatics, though, is I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to some of my love that I had when I was like high school, college, whatever. And then I'm also going to find new loves. So the love that I went back to, one was basketball and also singing. And the new love was dance. And this is the amazing thing. Dance has been one of the biggest things that healed me.
Yeah.
That was before I understood somatics. And for me, it was lots of reasons. It was, yes, that movement, that expression, that feeling. But for me, I was on also a journey to come home to myself and to heal my feminine. And for me, I felt the most, I could be the most feminine, the most myself. Not at first. At first, I was terrified of what everyone thought of me, of if I got the moves right, of what I looked like. But as I healed and I grew, like now it's like I am in my own little world. Like I am just here and I'm expressing and I'm
just
feeling.
having fun,
Yeah.
playing.
And so there's things for me. So now, fast forward to today, the things that I am doing just as a part of my daily life that are somatic is I still dance and I play sports, right? And so that's being in my body and that's healing. But then again, in healing spaces and maybe in my morning routine and other things, then that's where we can bring in like the breath work. We can, things like that. And this is where we're back to it really can be simple. The practices of somatics are really just about bringing you back to yourself, bringing you back to your body, bringing you to the present. And what I tell people as we talk about building capacity is that we start doing those things, make a habit of doing them when we are regulated, right? So we're not waiting until like, oh my gosh, I'm in fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I'm in one of these trauma responses.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We use them then too. But so I tell people like, even if it's simple breath, if there's a breath and you practice the breath every morning when you wake up, your body is going to get used to it. It's going to build capacity. It's going to be familiar. And then it's about what do you love? What does your body love? Make it fun, play, experience. Because I always tell people like when we're figuring out what somatic practices work for us, just because it works for me doesn't mean it works for you. So I tell them like, we're going to experiment. We're going to play. So I found the things that work for me. And so for me now I've switched. Like I dance every day. Some days it's for 5 minutes. Sometimes I put on that playlist and I end up doing it for a half an hour or an hour because it's so healing. And I actually, for me, I get downloads. Like when I'm dancing in the morning by myself, I'm just like, that's how like my intuition comes sometimes. And so this is the beautiful thing. It's like we said, this is the part where it's easy as far as like, it's not complicated, but you have to allow yourself to do it. And give yourself that gift of I am going to lean into and find and practice the things that work for and give myself the time and the space to explore and to heal. And it's all just for me, I think any of the work that we do is about loving self-awareness, right? Because we don't want to add the guilt and the shame and the fear and the shoulding ourselves does not help anybody. But it's so loving compassion and awareness. Because like you said, I mean, how long have we been in these patterns? Some of us, like you
years.
and I.
45 years I was in those patterns. Yeah, a long time.
So, we get to have compassion and grace that there's all these phases. And so for me, what has helped me and what I've come up with the women's group that I did and in the events for inner child healing that's related to the somatics is that, and again, this is what's worked for me and it's beautiful. So I love to share it, but it's not like, oh, mine is the right way. Mine is the right order, but I've created playlists so that you can be in your body. And to me, there's phases of this inner child healing. So for me, the first thing was for me to acknowledge my parts that I abandoned, right? So for me, some of the parts, for example, is I abandoned the sensual. Like, right, especially with my religion, like it wasn't okay for me to be sensual or sexual. It wasn't okay for me to be angry. And both of these are very common for society and women in general, right? And so I have this playlist where I get to just be all those things and feel all those things. And so first just acknowledging and playing and allowing the parts to, hey, come back. And then I have a grief playlist because like we said, like I got to grieve and mourn that I missed so much that I didn't, that I shoved them in the shadows, that I abandoned them, that I exiled them, right? And then for me, rage is the hardest one for me. But I have a rage one where it's like, no, also we got to be angry. We got to be angry for the things that happened to us, for not having those experiences. And when you talk about abuse, another thing, and you were talking about trauma, this is just related here because of the rage. So you talked about like how trauma, it's not necessarily the event, it's how we internalize it, but it's also like, who do we have there to witness and support us? And another thing, abuse is also, even if it's later, to heal abuse, it gets to be witnessed and called for what it is. Another powerful experience.
Call it what it is.
And this piece is to be, whether it's with yourself or whether it's other people, to rage and to be witnessed in that. Like there's been spaces where I do that with women. It is so beautiful. And I do it two-piece. So it's like you get to rage, but I want half of you witnessing that rage. That is beautiful for us to witness and to be aware, right?
Yes.
And then it's love and compassion for your parts. Then you got to have love and compassion after we have all these. And then the last part for me is celebration,
Yeah.
celebration of
That's
all of the
amazing. I love
parts.
that.
And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the inner child healing that has worked for me. And so the people that are drawn or called to work with me, like, you know, that's how I do it. And there's so many ways to do it, but that's, to me, it's like, oh, we get to include the somatics. We get to move our body. We get to move through it, but we get to feel it. We
Yeah.
get to have all the feelings and the emotions, but we get to move and
Yeah.
move it and heal it in that way.
So I've been working with my inner children for, I don't know, I guess I probably started maybe 6 months. So probably around the end of 2020 was the first time that I ever even knew that I had inner children. And this, working with my trauma therapist, and she
Yeah.
starts having this and I say this a lot, but like there are things that she's said to me that like when she's said the words, I know I looked at her like she had three heads. So like the first time she asked me about my emotional needs, I was like, my what? My
Yeah.
emotional what? And so the inner children was another one. I was like, who? I have no idea who you're talking about. And it took a long time, but then, suddenly they were there. And for me, I have three of them. So I have
Okay.
myself at 5, which was the first time that I was abused. And then I have myself at 8, just sort of understand, I think, why the 8-year-old is there. And then it's me at 17, which was me, the fully independent me, because of the way that I had been living for most of my high school years and a little bit before that, because of the family dynamics in my home. I'd already become extremely independent. And then I left at 17 and moved. My parents were living in Indonesia still at the time, and I came back to Texas to go to college. So I fully by myself, and I really didn't have a deep relationship with my family that was here. So it's kind of on my own. So I understand why she's there, because she represents this fierce independence that I have. But the 5-year-old is the one that we've really been working with a lot. And I've been through, I do a lot of my healing spiritually and in my mind with a lot of visualization. I think it's because I have the artistic side of my brain is very much engaged. And so I think that's a lot of the reason why I get that visualization through all different types of modalities. So, I've done it with somatic movement therapy, and I've done it with Reiki, and I've done it with trauma therapy. I can put the rhythmic aspects of like EMDR into my movement outside when I'm walking or running, and I get this processing that's going on. But it's taken me a long time. For a long time, her head was down. I could not get her to lift her head. And it was literally like a trust for me issue that I've really had to work on. And it's an interesting experience to have gone through. And I think we're a lot further along than we ever were. Of course, in the beginning when I first met them, we've come a long way. And I've probably healed most of that to this point. But that's an interesting, like working with your inner children it's an interesting process. And I think it's one from a healing perspective, particularly when the trauma and the abuse starts so young for some of us, it can't be ignored because, all those, I'm going to tell people that, when I was abused at 5, I was shackled behind a wall that I would build around myself for 45 years. And that is a very true statement. And so that childlike being that we are, living as a child, experiencing being a child, it's taken from us. And getting that back is hugely important in the healing process. Just something as simple as play, the joy that comes from play, And like I'm 54 years old, and I have been sleeping with a teddy bear for 4 years because and there was a reason for that. It had to do with
Yeah.
me getting divorced and like the emptiness, that break of that other being. And my therapist was like, get a teddy bear. And so I did. And I've been sleeping with Mr. Gunn for 4 years. But that's that child part of me alive again, right? And I don't ever want that to die again, but it's a journey. But I think, I touched on this a little bit in my book, which is about my healing journey. And I think it's, when I write my next book, there will be a significant portion of that about self-love, because I've discovered a lot about self-love, and that inner child piece is huge in that. And I don't think we give enough merit to it from a healing perspective, as I said, so particularly when it starts young for us. But you obviously you know all about this and
Well,
embrace it,
I love
and
that you
help
brought up.
people with it. It's
Well, I
amazing.
love that you brought up play, because there's two things that have pretty much been universal with the one-on-one clients that I've really leaned more into the inner child healing aspect this last year, right? And so the first thing that comes is again, I have this inner child meditation that I do. And the first thing that comes is they have this experience, with this younger self. And it's like whatever age that child shows up in their meditation, we find out like, what did that child want or need? And in words that are this way or similar, almost every client, they wanted to be loved for who they were, right? So that's the first thing. But then the interesting thing is after they got that need, it was like, okay, so now what do you need?
Yeah.
Almost always it is play, some version of play. And it's the most beautiful thing. Like one person, it was like, I want to play dress up. And I'm like, oh, well, then you're going to play dress up. You don't have to buy clothing. You're a grown woman. You're going to go to all these stores. You're going to try on stuff. You're going to take pictures. You're going to just play. You're going to have fun. But it's some form of play.
Yes. Yes.
After they get the love, it's some form of play. And it's just interesting. And so for me, we're talking about I love that you brought this up because it's become really clear to me the last couple of weeks as I've just been even diving into like my purpose is you talk about creation and art and I'm similar too, right? Like I used to think that, oh, I'm just a healer and I have to like pick one. But what my inner child and what things have been coming up to me recently is like, you are a creative and you're a healer. You're a creative healer. Like that's what you are.
Yes, exactly.
And so for me, it's healing through self-expression, which has the somatics and the art and play, right?
Yes.
And it's interesting when you talk about the other thing that I love about inner child work is we go back to like this not having rigidity of there's no right way, for instance, right? Like you have ages that you went back to, and that's very common. And for me, I maybe have 2 ages, but mine are more parts and roles. Like for instance, I've had to heal most my inner critic. My inner critic, that part of me has been like at play the most. But then also there's one age, every time I do a meditation where I go back to my younger self, I'm like 2 or 3, and I'm in this beautiful yellow dress that my mom's mom, my grandma made me. I still have it. And I don't have many things, but I still have this dress and I wonder why I kept it or how I kept it or whatever. It has come in every meditation since I've healed. But this is the beautiful thing. And this was even before I knew, I told you how dancing was what, healed me. And I used to think, oh, I'm all these other things when I realized again, for me, I really am a creative. And so in this meditation, one of the meditations I had it was an inner child healing one, she's talking to me and she grabs my face. She's just so cute in that yellow dress. And why did you stop? Why? She goes, why did we stop dancing?
Oh.
And then I'm like bawling because I've already stopped dancing. Like I was like,
yes.
like, right? Because I was a tomboy. I remember like obviously this dancing, I was 2 or 3, like this dancing was very young, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And but it's just so beautiful to be able to like merge all these pieces and to like come home to yourself and to have, even for me, that validation of like, oh my gosh, I'm on the right path. And yeah, so it's been beautiful, but like that's like my favorite, like I have that dress and
that's so cool.
Like, it's in my dress.
Yeah, well, back to where we started earlier in the conversation about something happens and you look like you're, oh, that's why I still have that dress. Now I understand the dress and why I still have it, right?
Yeah, and so on my inner child healing vision board, she's on there. And
inner child the vision board. So I guess my blog, which I've been writing a little bit about her, and I'll have to obviously do a lot more writing about it, but.
So something this is another easy thing that you can do for anybody on here that wants to like start and you don't know where to start. So that's what I do. Like I have pictures of my younger self, and there's 2 things that I do. One, it's easy. You can just have them, and whether you have them on your mirror or a board or wherever. And when you know what your younger self needed, then I just make I am statements. I'm loved. I am beautiful.
That's
whatever.
amazing.
And I put all and I've done it with all my children too. Like my kitchen is all pictures of me as a kid. And I had a lot of guilt and shame after my divorce. My kids were younger. And so I have pictures of my kids before the divorce when for me, it was like they were full of life and like all this stuff. And so I was like, I'm not waiting until they're old to do inner child healing. We're doing it now.
Yeah, right. Yes.
And then the other beautiful thing that you can do, everyone out there, this is super easy. You can make a playlist, and I do this in my events too, a portion of this. So another way to heal is I have a playlist that I've created for my events and for my clients and for myself. It's just called I Get to Love You. And it's basically all these love songs that, the people that wrote them really wrote them for partnership love or whatever. But the intention is that you're singing this song to yourself. To
Yes.
feel your inner child.
Self-love.
So I have
Yes.
this whole playlist where I tell people, whether you're looking in the mirror, whether you're looking at pictures of yourself,
Yeah.
start listening to songs and singing them to yourself, to
A
your inner.
great idea, and so simple.
Yeah, again,
You just go,
yeah,
you go find that sappy love song playlist and just sit in the mirror and let it play to yourself, right? It's so
yeah,
easy. It's
for
hard.
sure.
I will say that would be hard for me because it's something I still work on, but like making that eye contact with myself. Like when I get dressed in the morning, a lot of times I'm literally looking through myself, right? I'm not like focusing like, oh, who are you? I'm interested in you. I love you, right? That's hard to do, but
Yes.
yeah, those are some great tips. So simple and great tips. And I also love what you said about your kids, starting with the inner child work when they're children, when they're active in a time in their life when they may be experiencing trauma that can be with
Yeah.
them for years and damage them, but to address
Yeah.
that immediately. I love that. That is an amazing gift for your kids, and they are very blessed to have that from you.
Oh, thank you.
That's amazing. All right, so I need to ask you, I'm going to ask you about my somatic movement
Okay.
therapy
Yes.
experience. So this is about 2 years before I had my hypnotherapy. So of course, hypnotherapy was the gateway event for me that I woke up and I was like, oh, I have something to heal from. I probably need to deal with this. But about 2 years before that, I met this woman who was a somatic movement therapist, and I did 2 sessions with her where I was like fully rigid. Like she was trying to get me to move. I mean, she was trying body work. I mean, she was a Reiki master as well. So she was trying everything to like release my body so that it would move. But I was like a board, literally, the first 2 sessions. And then the third session that I had with her, I suppose I was making a little bit of progress. And I don't remember exactly what happened. It was like a music she was playing or a tone or something, maybe on a singing bowl, but it hit me and like started to get me like my body to kind of move like I'm doing right now, kind of like
Yeah.
like a snake will move, wasn't dancing, but kind of just some movement, a lot less rigidity. And what happened through that was like I felt emotion, which the particular emotion that I was dealing with was guilt and shame that I'd been holding inside of me at that point for about 3.5 years. And I felt it come out of my lower abdomen. And literally, it was like somebody pulled the cork out of a champagne bottle. And it's like I felt the bubbles of the champagne bottle exploding from my lower abdomen, and just it like just came out in this flood of tears, and me just, I mean, I'm like bawling and then telling this woman this story about why I was carrying all of this guilt and shame. And I had not spoken a word about the event that caused me to feel that way to anyone since the night it had happened. And it was like this. I mean, I get, when thinking about it now, I get cold chills because it was like it just erupted out of me. But it was also the last major traumatic event, my majors. It was the last one that I experienced before the hypnotherapy, which would come about 2 years later. And then my divorce was after that. So I was experiencing a lot of micro things in those years, of course, but not the big ones. But it was like just like it popped it off, and I feel like that allowed that the last trauma and the severity of that, which was crushing to me, it was significant to me. It's like it allowed that to come out, and then my body was able to go on eventually then and have the hypnotherapy, which led me to get everything out eventually. But tell me what happened. I'm super curious about this.
Okay, so this is interesting. Well, one, just on a basic level, women store trauma in their hips, right?
Oh,
That's
interesting.
not, I mean, that's down in that region.
Yeah.
Emotions are in our gut, right? But this is the thing that actually is fascinating to me as I've done the work. Like that it happened exactly that way and exactly in that place, unless I know more, I might not have an answer, but but is what happened is it was just like that was your body's way of releasing, and then the tears and whatever, and it's not always the same. For instance, I've had clients on my table, and it's interesting, I combine Reiki, somatics, inner child healing, whatever the body needs, and and people are always like, is this normal, is that normal, is that, and I'm like, there's not, I really,
What is
you
normal?
might not, that's what I'm saying, you might not love this answer, but I'm like, there is no normal, I don't think, because everyone's
Yeah.
so different. Your trauma's
Yes.
different, your
Yes.
body's different.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
so, for
Healing's different.
example,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not your body released in that way, but I had somebody, this has only happened once, but I had somebody once last year that literally we processed. It was crazy and intense and scary and hard, but literally they were done and they were like, I have to throw up. And they literally just went in my bathroom and like threw up. But that was it. They were done. It wasn't that they were sick. And I was like, that was a lot that you were holding on to, right? And so I think if I could say, the thing is it's, we're actually just back to safety, because if I would have, if you would have been my client for those first two where you were stiff as a board, once I realized you were stiff as a board, I probably wouldn't have tried to have you do anything else, because that was your body talking. Oh, why is your body stiff? What is it trying to tell us? Why doesn't your body want to move? Like, I would have gone into that. And then also just trusting, if you felt safe in the container. So that's first, like, if you felt safe in the container with me and safe with yourself, then it would be like, okay, well, this is what your body needs to say. If we're safe, your body's going to reorganize however it needs to.
That's interesting you said that, because I'm guessing when you said that, it was like, duh, the rigidity of my body was, I think, probably me trying to keep that in, because it was a very traumatic experience for me, but I carried a lot of shame, the fault being mine, because I did not prevent something from happening that I knew I could have prevented. And, I lost my dog, who I loved dearly. I don't have kids, so equivalent of a child to me.
Yes, of course.
And she was killed viciously, tragically and viciously, and I could have prevented it. And so I had so much, that shame and guilt is what I was, which is why I would never speak of it, because I was so ashamed that I had not prevented her death. And I guess that rigidity is that, right? It's like, this isn't coming out. I'm keeping this inside of me. That's why I was like so rigid around it, right? So I guess I never thought about it that way, but it's interesting. So exploring why, why was I? And, this has been a while back. And of course, I had that experience, and I've gone back to think about it now, obviously, with what I've been through. But I realize, I just remember like that rumbling and coming out. And so I've always had this curiosity about like what was happening,
Well, and even if you think, if you're very take things literal with our body, right?
Yeah.
Even like, oh, why did it happen? Like, if you think about the rigidity and how long you've been holding it in, to me is what it sounds like. It's like an explosion. Like, if you hold stuff in for so long, eventually it's going to explode. And that's what it was. It was like, it was finally ready. Like pressure. It was an explosion.
That is true. And I'd held so much emotion in at that point in time. It was full. Too much emotion inside of me. That's got to come out.
Well, I mean, that's what the first one is, right? The whole idea of feelings buried alive never die. Like, eventually, if we shove and suppress, things are going to come out as dis-ease, as injury. They can't. They're not going to stay buried forever. We will. Our bodies, minds, hearts, souls will pay the price of repressed emotions.
And that is a huge advertisement for the reason why we heal. Don't pay the price, end our suffering. But I mean, as you and I both know, the only way to get there is to go through the hard work and to do it. But it's joyous on the other side.
Yes. And even for me, like, the biggest shift is that I just think now it's just like, for me, like, I really do trust and believe that all emotions have purpose. Right. And I don't even like the people that say positive and negative emotions, like, that is out. That is old school. Like, right. I cringe when I hear like school counselors or anybody, but especially people with kids talking about negative emotions. Because I'm like, no, if you want to label them at all, like high vibe, low vibe, because we do have, we
fear-based or love-based. That's how I think about them.
Yeah. And so, because it's like, no, they all serve a purpose. And that's the whole point. When we hold and we resist and whatever, that's when those things happen. And so once we allow, and there's not this judgment attached to it, and there's love and compassion for ourselves, I find that the emotions really do move through me, like you say. Like, for instance,
me too. Yeah,
like, if
absolutely.
I have to cry, whether it's 5 minutes or whether it's 5 hours or whether it's a day.
Yeah.
When I allow it without judgment and just to be, then it's like, okay, right? Yeah. Where there's so many things out there that are like, because again, I am a firm believer in, the law of attraction and in gratitude and what those things can do, and what we focus on expands, but we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So when we try to spiritual bypass, the same thing, like, that's not helpful. Like, there's so many people out there that are like, not allowing us to have that sadness or that rage or feeling all those emotions. There's just as much purpose. And if our body wants to feel them, there's a reason. Like, for instance, usually anger, it's like, there's probably a boundary being crossed,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
There's
exactly. Yeah,
probably a
that's right.
boundary
That's
being
exactly right.
crossed, right?
Yes, yes.
And so for me, it's just allowing them. And the more we like let hold of that grip and of like, I shouldn't be feeling this. This is like all those things that it's just
Judging the emotion,
and so that's why I
judging
call
ourselves for
yeah,
having the emotion, right?
that's why
Yes.
I love loving self-awareness is what I talk
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
right? And so for me now, like there's times this might be a little weird, but for real, like I love just again all these expressions. Now there's times where like I'll be crying and like mourning or feeling something, and I'll look in the mirror and I'll be like, I look really beautiful right now. Like this is so beautiful. This is so beautiful. Where before I would right.
Oh, you're inspiring me, Rebecca. If I could only get to that place at some point in time, because I'm really ugly when I cry. So if I could ever get there, that
Sometimes
would be
I'm like,
amazing.
tears are like beautiful. Like, right? Oh
Not
my God.
that. I have a hard time saying that to myself. I totally get what you're saying. I'll work on it, but I am never going to be in Hollywood being a crying actress because it's terrible. I do not cry pretty.
Well, I mean, I
But
don't know that I do. It's just that shift for me of like,
even more of an inspiration to me to get to that point. So that's fantastic. Yeah. So this has been wonderful. I've enjoyed our conversation. I could talk to you for another hour at
you
least.
know,
We'll probably do it again at some point in time. But you've given some really great tips, some things that are simple that I really love. And so go back and have a listen if you need to know exactly what those were. And I'm going to put some of them in the show notes when it comes out because I think they're really fantastic. But for people to find you, to get you to help them out in whatever form that may be, how do they connect with you?
okay, so I am on Instagram. It's empowered by us, but it's empowered underscore by underscore us. And then that's also my email. It's empoweredbyus@gmail.com. So you can reach out to me any of those ways. And on my Instagram, if you want some just easy tips too, under my highlights, I have like inner child healing. I have some somatic stuff, Reiki things. So you can kind of look for some tips in the highlights. But yeah, reach out. I work one-on-one, events, retreats, corporations, schools, any of the above.
Fantastic. And I will put your contact details into the show notes here so that our listeners can get to those easily as well. Good. All right. Thanks so much for being with me today. I really, really appreciate it. And I will see you soon.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed today's episode and stay tuned for the next one. Come on, everybody. Let's heal.